Oi, oi, it's your boy, the Amanda Lemosh of sounding gay and posh, Jack Slack. It's the Jack Slack podcast, and we're coming at you on Monday the 21st, following UFC 292, which was Sterling, he was the champion at the time, versus O'Malley. Now it's O'Malley versus Sterling if they do the rematch. Yeah, some decent stuff. A hard one to catch up on because obviously I watched these the day after because I, one, live in England, two, am not just a masochist. But whenever you wake up and you go, ooh, 4 finishes on a 12-fight card, you know you're in for the long haul. Lots to be watched. But mercifully, they were all quite interesting, the decisions. So, yeah, lots to talk about today. I suppose we should start at the top. Sean O'Malley versus Aljamain Sterling. If you didn't read it, this week I unlocked an old article I wrote after O'Malley beat Thomas Almeida in what was an obvious setup. But it was called Sean O'Malley and the Cross Step. And it was talking about some of the weird things he does, but particularly this cross step, his switch hitting generally, and how it all works in service of that open side counter. If you're new here, the open side counter is, if I'm southpaw and you're orthodox, when you throw your right hand, I'm going to slide back to my left, and then I'm going to throw my left hand over the top. It's a move where you rely on the opponent overcommitting and falling short. It's the move that Conor McGregor's career was built around. Wonderboy does it a lot. Ian Gary's first knockout in the UFC was with it. Sean O'Malley does it all the time. Perfect example would be the Thomas Almeida finish. Perfect example, actually, would be this finish from this fight was an open side counter. But it's an old move. Benny Leonard, who you may not even have heard of, the Ghetto Wizard. He was, 1920s? 1917 to 1925. Damn, I'm good. He was the world lightweight champion. Generally, people argue between him and Duran for the best ever. But he was a wonderful boxer. And the only footage we have of him, ironically, is against a southpaw, Lou Tendler. And Lou Tendler was one of the first southpaws to really actually get anywhere in boxing because it used to be a really cutthroat business for southpaws. They were weird and difficult. And a lot of the time that made the fights ugly and boring, as people didn't really want to commit in the same way to their offense. And so you had managers who didn't want their fighters to fight them and promoters who didn't want to deal with boring fights. But Lou Tendler managed to make himself undeniable and got this fight with Benny Leonard for the world lightweight title. And the only footage that exists of Leonard in his prime or, at his best, there was one way later when he came back in like the 30s. But the only footage that exists of him at his best is against Lou Tendler, and he hits an open side counter in that. It's absolutely gorgeous. It's really interesting because it's before the sort of standard open stance 101 tactics catch on, so hand fighting, throwing the rear hand, stepping down the outside of the opponent's lead foot, and he's using his jab and the open side counter and stuff, which is now stuff that's come back into vogue against southpaws. But yes, open side counter, I'm going on about it a lot because it was the only thing of note that happened in this fight. I actually, there are a couple of fights on this one where the result was fairly emphatic. So Aljamain Sterling got knocked out very convincingly, unless you're that one guy on Twitter who is like, his account's like the number one betting advice site in the world, blah, blah, blah. And then he's just, all his tweets are just him crying about this result and how Herb Dean wouldn't have let it end that quickly. But the other one's Amanda Lemosh. She actually, she got her ass kicked. And she lost the fight by like 218 strikes to 21. But she did some stuff that I thought, man, bit tricky. Not a dead duck by any means. But if you've listened to this podcast before, we've already told you how to beat O'Malley. People have done it since then, and it'll be coming back around because this is the easiest killing the king I'd ever have to write. Do the stuff I already said works against him and has already worked against him. Kick with him, change stances with him, make his life hard, throw lots of front kicks because he loves the front kick, try and use his front kicks to get in. But Aljo came out kicking, switching stances to be, well, not to be on the same stance as O'Malley or to confuse him in that way, but just to continue kicking weirdly. Threw some front kicks, pushed him back towards the fence. That was all good. It was his inability to capitalise on it that was really disappointing. But that first round, not an awful lot happened. Aljo was coming forward throwing kicks that weren't doing an awful lot. O'Malley didn't really land anything of note. Aljo attempted one takedown, didn't succeed. So, no one really won it. Maybe you give it to Aljo, I don't know. But Yeah, one error in the second round cost him the whole fight, and it was the one we're always talking about. Sean O'Malley uses front kicks to the body to get people to run at him. And it's something that Conor McGregor used to do a lot. You know, he'd back people up to the fence and kick them in the body so that they came off the fence at him. Because as soon as you start throwing good front kicks to the body, the other guy has to get something back. He has to go, okay, right, I can't just let him kick me in the body for free, and he'll chase the leg back. And what O'Malley's very good at is getting his feet down and bouncing back to the open side to throw the counter off the front kick. You've got to be real quick to get your feet back down to the floor and in position to bounce back. And he's also really good at just, he'll do that, and he'll also do, go read the article. I'm linking it in the show notes on YouTube because it's open for everyone, it's free. But he also does a thing where he throws the front kick and then puts it down in front of himself, sort of across himself, and steps his other foot back. And then that puts him on a line to do back kicks and back fists and things, weird counters, which I really like. But, this was just standard O'Malley. Throw the front kick, the guy lunges at you, you bounce back on the open side, he's thrown his right hand, you throw your left hand over the top. When you're dealing with the open side counter, what you're doing really is you're starting a duel with flintlocks, because you're betting on them throwing their right hand hard enough that they throw themselves out of position, long enough for you to throw your left hand as hard as you can, and then you're going to be out of position after it. If you watch O'Malley after he throws and lands this punch, he's completely out of position. He's completely off balance. It's the same as Conor McGregor sliding back against Jose Aldo. Got cracked in the head with the left hook afterwards of the unconscious Aldo, and didn't really have anywhere to go, because to throw everything into it, you have to put your body weight into it. I think what cost Aljo a lot in this fight, a lot of people will point to not trying enough takedowns. Yeah, that's a good point. But not having anything convincing to feint O'Malley back with, because Aljo's hands are such a non-threat most of the time, he can't shoulder feint. He can't pump out a double jab from a distance where he'll never get countered, but just to get O'Malley moving. He can't do those things to chew up distance. He can raise his knees, he can throw front kicks and things like that, and he did do that, but it's not as valuable as being able to stay on both feet and move and feint the guy back. So I think that cost him. And also just, lunging wildly for O'Malley after the front kick cost him. But some of the takes after this, people getting mad about the stoppage. I thought the stoppage was fine. I think Aljo said the stoppage was fine. But people be like, oh, the UFC always wanted Sean O'Malley to be the champion. Clearly, they've put their finger on the scale. You're like, how? They told the ref to stop it early? It's a commission ref. It's Mark Goddard, who's historically been pretty decent. And Sean O'Malley's an interesting character anyway, because he is so outspoken against the managers of other fighters who are the people in the pocket of the UFC. People like Ali Abdelaziz, the cowards, people who aren't really advocating for the fighter. They're sort of just convincing the fighter that they're advocating for the fighter. O'Malley's been outspoken about that. He did, however, win the belt and immediately say that he wants to box Gervonta Davis, which is fucking stupid, of course. It's working less and less, this stuff, but it's sad that this is still the only proven means to earn your worth as a UFC fighter. The ideal career path for the MMA fighter now is to reach the pinnacle of their craft, and then that opens the door for a con. You open the door to do a fight that you have no chance of winning, and you know that. Like, Conor McGregor had sparred with boxers. He hadn't, never met a boxer before he took the Mayweather fight. He knew exactly, maybe he didn't know exactly how badly he was going to lose, but he knew that he wasn't that level. And he still managed to convince everyone and earn hundreds of millions of dollars in the process. Francis Ngannou, I'm sure he thinks that he has won the one-punch power and he just has to catch Tyson Fury. But, it's like Tom Aspinall has boxed with Tyson Fury as a sparring partner. And he's quite open about the fact that he's not going to be outboxing Tyson Fury. Sean O'Malley cannot believe that he beat Gervonta Davis in a boxing match, but he would love that money. And if not, it's free publicity. It's free publicity with boxing nerds who are going to be like, oh, this fucking O'Malley, these fucking UFC guys. And spreading the word on Twitter. But we've got loads of interesting stuff lined up for O'Malley now. I mean, bantamweight division's great just generally, which is why it's been so odd that they had to do Henry Cejudo come back, TJ Dillashaw with a broken shoulder. You're like, why are these people getting title shots? This is the most exciting division in the UFC. There's always stuff going on here. But O'Malley versus Sandhagen sounds fantastic. Two very different styles of striker. O'Malley versus Merab, because obviously Aljo getting out of the way opens up Merab for the title shot. Bring back Aldo, that's what I say. But yeah, it's a good division. There's lots of stuff going on. I mean, they're trying to do the Marlon Vera thing just because of the built-in quote-unquote rivalry, but Marlon Vera is just getting back on track after doing nothing against Corey Sandhagen. Co-main event was Zhang Weili versus Amanda Lemosh. This was a really interesting one because someone who was in... I've had a couple of emails from different people in Zhang's camp to the podcast that I've wanted to do something about, but it was mainly people saying, "Oh, thanks, you're a bit of an influence, and I'm over here with Weili Zhang and stuff." And I was like, I can't really do that because it's not so much a question as me sucking my own dick. But there was a very interesting Twitter thread, or X thread, whatever we're calling it, by a guy called Ghost. It's written in Leet, if you remember that from the old forum days where the rules were always absolutely no Leet. But 9H6ST21 on Twitter, he's got a great thread up. He did some tape study for Zhang for this fight about Lemosh and her tendency to overcommit, working on the double jab to try and draw those things out, and so on. And I thought his reads were excellent. He's got clips of Zhang working on stuff specifically for this fight because of those reads, like the double jab. And then Zhang got in the fight and she wasn't able to use it as effectively as you would hope. She got clipped a few times with things that the scouting report told her about. And then I also thought Phil McKenzie, I think it was, said it on Heavy Hands, but he said Zhang is going to get dropped at some point because she always gets caught on one leg. And when I think that was the fourth round or the third round fourth round, she got dinged in the chin while she was kicking on one leg and got dropped to her back. And it turned out she was fine, but she does get punched in the face a lot on one leg, which is the worst time to get punched. Ask Michael Chandler, the only person to lose a round to Tony Ferguson in 5 years. But yes, go and read Ghost's thread. It's really interesting. And he got a nice picture of Zhang holding the Slacky logo, which I thought was very sweet. So thank you to him. And thank you for that great thread. It was really interesting. And in one of the clips that he put up from his phone with the footage that he was studying, you can hear my ass in the background moaning about fighter pay on an unrelated podcast. But yes, Zhang, if you saw the decision and you saw the stats and things, it was a one-sided ass-kicking. There was some interesting moments from Lemosh. She got taken down almost immediately, and she really did make herself a threat with a ninja choke, which both DC and Rogan were going on and on about it being a DAS, while Zhang Weili's hand is completely free. Her other arm is completely free. Both her arms are out of the loop of the choke. So it's not an arm, and it's not any form of arm triangle. It's just a choke, a front choke, a choke on the neck, a naked choke, whatever you want to call it. Actually, no, naked just means no gi. But yes, it's really interesting because the ninja choke is rapidly, when we did those choke rankings when we did those choke stats from the UFC on the Boycast the other day, the ninja choke has shot up in a very short amount of time. There's only been 10, 15 of them, can't remember how many, but they've all come very recently. Whereas, obviously, there's been, 300 UFC pay-per-views plus all those other events for people to build up triangle chokes, rear naked chokes, and all that stuff that's been there since the start. Ninja chokes are pretty new. You don't see them in grappling very much because they're very much it's the context and the scenario that create the ninja choke. It's interesting because the guy who got famous for it originally, and I say famous in the most niche of terms, was a guy in Shuto. And he caught one, he was just arsing around pretending to play rubber guard, and he managed to sneak his, the V of his biceps and forearm in front of the guy's chin while he was arsing around pretending to play rubber guard. Then he let go of the rubber guard and punched his hands through for the lock, and he got the choke. And he then subsequently released a DVD in Japanese called the Ninja Choke. But Shuto's fought in a ring. That was him flat on his back, the other guy just trying to bury his head in his stomach. The reason that it's working so well in MMA is because of the wall wrestling. I'd like to differentiate between a power guillotine and a ninja choke. A power guillotine is where you put the guy's head in your armpit like you're going to guillotine him, and then you punch your hands through with the rear naked choke grip. Really powerful choke. I know a lot of guys, especially who train a lot of MMA or with a lot of MMA fighters, go to that as their finish because it's so strong, and getting your legs in the right position against a slippy opponent is so difficult. The ninja choke is more like you're arm is across your body in front of you as they're going in for a double leg or something like that, and they drop their neck into the V of your bicep, and then you punch your hand over the top. They're not in your armpit, they're more in front of you. But yes, Lemosh was able to attack that several times, and it was from the same, just Zhang ploughing in with her head, just keeping her head low by keeping her head low and in, and just trying to keep Lemosh against the fence. The first one looked convincing. The second one was not so much. I think there was a third one later on, but she'd taken a much worse beating by that point. There were a couple of instances where she was in half guard and she used a sort of giggler knee lever to throw Zhang across the top of her, stiff-armed and got up, which was very impressive. So those were cool, and then she landed some good punches later on. But for the most part, this was Zhang just getting top position and dominating. And a lot of her entries, or a lot of her successful takedowns, were off the body lock, and those she got off Lemosh swinging wide. I'm thinking about like the second round where Lemosh came out, swung her right hand, and Zhang just stepped in, grabbed her, smashed her straight down into side control. No guard passing necessary because she flanked her from the body lock. Really great top control from Zhang for the most part. Good going between the knee lever and the butterfly hook from Lemosh. You can do good things from the bottom, but you're still losing. If you do one or two awesome sweeps or get-ups around, you've still accomplished nothing in the long run, especially if the top guy is throwing strikes the whole time, which Zhang was. Still got lots of flicky kicking that didn't really do much in there for Zhang. When she worked with Cejudo for that Namajunas rematch, they got her in the habit of throwing combinations with her hand and ending with a right low kick. And that worked so well for her. I mean, it's not a fucking secret. That's what Mike Goldberg would always go, Dutch kickboxing, as soon as someone did that. But it's a great way to land low kicks on someone when they're stood there having to take it. And they're not as likely to step in and counter you. Whereas Zhang is throwing like lead leg side teeps, the Sanshai style push kick, and missing and getting like wildly out of position or getting hit. It's just that part of her, the part that kickboxed, the part that had a 15-minute kickboxing match with Danielle Taylor and should have lost, is still in there. She's got that totally not dog in her. But otherwise, what can you complain about? Great performance, absolute domination. And she seems to be like almost universally beloved. The only people who don't like her are people who are a bit racist or people who are super horny for Rose. And there is one of those in particular, the Rose guy, who on seeing Zhang in this video will probably make 8 or 9 accounts to comment on the YouTube. But it's a weird mix. If you're super horny for Rose, but you're also a bit racist to begin with, those are the people that absolutely hate Zhang. I think it's really interesting that Colby Covington seems to really like Zhang, because surely his whole bit is like communist China is coming for us to put us in the jerk-off machines. But yes, in a landscape where the UFC has promised like world domination so many times, they went to Shanghai with Anderson Silva. He pulled out. They had to use Michael Bisping on like 3 weeks' notice after getting dropped by GSP. They're fucking Macau events headlined by 45-year-old Kung Lee, who now might be the man responsible for breaking up the UFC monopoly in a couple of years. That'll be very funny. But yeah, China was always like, oh, there's so much potential in China, but we have no good Chinese fighters. And Zhang she stands out as, you got Song Yadong, that's the other one, but no one is on the level compared to their opposition that Zhang seems to be. And she's also just living her best life. I love that she's going around training with everyone, learning new exciting things. She's got Josh Hinger in her corner. I really noticed that when she hit that single off the fence. I was like, oh, yeah, some old man wrestling, courtesy of Josh Hinger. But he was always famous for his guillotine. He was going at ADCC in his late 30s. He turned up there. Really impressive guy. And the podcast he used to do very briefly with Keenan Cornelius was great fun. But she's getting out to see Sanshai, she's training in Thailand, she's doing all sorts of fun stuff. Now, if she just go to China and set up a gym and, I suspect people don't actually care about the UFC there. And that's the main reason she hasn't started a Conor McGregor-style rush of children and teenagers to mixed martial arts. Speaking of which, actually, that brings us on to Ian Gary, a guy who started in MMA. I think he was in judo first, and then he started in MMA because he saw Conor McGregor. And yeah, this was a massive win. The whole night, or just these two big fights, were big wins for tape study boys, because Gary does a lot of tape study. You know, he was talking about exactly what he was going to do to Daniel Rodriguez based on the tape study. But man, he, you know, if you were doing tape study on Neil Magny, you'd look at the fights with RDA and Lawrence Larkin, and you'd go, well, you know, you can't do the same thing to him again. I mean, he got blown out so badly in those fights that he must have shored up those holds. No, not at all. First, outside low kick to the calf. Neil Magny's stumbling around like Bambi on ice. Gary probably watched the Lawrence Larkin fight, which was one of the all-time great beatdowns in the UFC. Such a great fight. I think Larkin left off that, or did he leave off the one after that? But yeah, Larkin left in a great place, and then he went to Bellator, and he's gone like 8-1 since then, and no one seems to give a shit. Fucking love Larkin. But yeah, Larkin was hitting him with outside low kicks to the lead leg, below the knee, and then he'd pick up his knee as if to throw that kick. He'd pick up his knee outside the line of his body to flash up in Magny's vision that something was coming, and he'd throw basically an oblique kick with his heel, and his knee sort of turned out, to the body. And he'd stomp on him, and it was gorgeous. I mean, I did a video years ago called like the kicks and tricks of Lorenz Larkin, which I think is still up on YouTube. Pretty badly made next to my modern Filthy Casuals guides, but maybe I'll rework that at some point. I'll do the same shit, but I'll make it nicely edited. But yeah, you know, that was fucking kick for kick, minus the cool oblique kick. That was what Ian Gary did here. And he did a bit of boxing. He used his usual nice long jab. He used a couple of 1-2s and things. He hit the body with a right straight along the fence, which I love to see, the old Johannian J-check look. But for the most part, he just kicked and kicked for free. Neil Magny had no idea what he was doing. And this is the thing, like, there are, you know, when we talk about like fight prep, if you're dealing with someone specifically, you can prepare counters for them. If you're dealing with a weapon that a lot of people use, this is why, like, not being able to deal with the calf kick is unacceptable in modern MMA, because everyone throws it, and the barrier for entry, you know, to be able to throw a good calf kick is so fucking low. You know, not everyone's going to be able to throw a good step-up left high kick. Flexibility, speed to get there without a big telegraph, tricky. Everyone and their mum can be taught to throw a good hard calf kick with a little bit of telegraph, but like long enough that they'll probably catch you if you don't do something. That's why everyone's doing it now, because it is such a easy technique to pick up. But with things like that, you want to prepare a counter, or a couple of counters. You know, I always think of Edwin Hazlitt, wrote the book on boxing, just a little textbook for teaching kids in schools and things. Laid out, you know, his 8 key combinations or setups, his, you know, his favourite defences and stuff. And then he had a section that was just like a list of possible counters to various punches. And there's hundreds there, you know, you counter... catch the left hook, counter with the left uppercut. Weird shit like that. Just in text. But before that, he has a section on the 8 key counters to the jab. And he says, learn 3 of them. Pick the 3 you like, learn them, because you're going to be dealing with jabs all the time. So everyone should have something to counter the calf kick. But then there's other stuff, like there are ways that you can look at something that's being a massive problem and change. You can just take it away. Like, if you're dealing with someone with a great jab, and that's ruining your day to the point that you can't get anything else going, switch stances in hand fight. If you keep your hand in line of their hand and in the way between their hand and your face, very hard for them to jab. Calf kicks, switch stances, because then they have to do a step-up outside calf kick, or a step-up outside kick with their lead leg, which is a completely different move. Or do something like Nate Diaz against Anthony Pettis. You know, he has always been shit at defending low kicks. He knew he was going to have to deal with some low kicks. So what he did was he just like kept stepping his back foot up or across in front of his front foot, and then picking his lead leg up, the knee up nice and high, and stepping in, doing like a big step, like he was stepping over a child's tea party in the middle of the room. And he just kept doing that, kept stepping forward, picking his knee up and floating in, or doing a really shitty teep. You know, Nate Diaz teep, not going to do much, but it keeps his leg from being kicked. So the fact that Neil Magny had no ideas and just stood there in his usual stance, taking the kick, amazing. And the other thing is that, like, once you've taken a few, you're going to be slow to the checks and withdrawals anyway. So, yeah, he was a bit fucked after round 1. But he lost All 3 rounds 10-8. Lots of people saying his corner should have just stopped it after the second. This is MMA. You know, no one's ever going to stop a fight early. But yeah, I've never seen... I expected him to not look his best because he is on the downward slope now. There's lots of people saying that he's washed and, you know, he'll probably pick up a couple of wins over jobbers. But to be this clueless about something that has been so obviously a weakness for you in the past, because, like, you know, it's not just the fact that he's not taking them well. It's that the way his stance is set up, if you calf kick him, he'll fall over most of the time. That happened a dozen times against Larkin. All Rafael dos Anjos needed to do was a step-up outside kick with his lead leg, because he was a southpaw, to knock Magny's leg out and put him on the ground. And, I mean, you know, this is something that I forgot to mention in the co-main event, but Weili Zhang didn't even have to take her down in the first round. She just threw a kick under a Lemosh high kick. She cut kick her. Might have even been by accident. But if you get cut kick in MMA, or you get kicked off balance and end up on the ground, it doesn't matter that it wasn't a good takedown. It doesn't matter that it doesn't score as a takedown. You're on your back and you're losing the round. So an impressive performance by Magny. Sorry, fuck no, not an impressive performance by Magny. An impressive performance by Gary. A really unimpressive performance by Magny. But then, you know, are we expecting Neil Magny to get better at this stage in the game? He is there as a gatekeeper. He's supposed to test people. And Ian Gary looked at the tape, worked out what the issue with, you know, what the obvious hole was in Neil Magny that hasn't been repaired, and went after it. Lots of interesting fights you can do with him now. Even though I said on the preview episode of the Boycast and the Boycast, I said that maybe we should start calling the welterweight. Maybe we should stop considering middleweight and down the better weight classes. I think it's probably just lightweight and down. But so there's a couple of interesting fights out there. You could do him versus Jake Della Maddalena. You could do him versus... Well, he was talking about Wonder Boy, but I think they want to give Wonder Boy a wrestler to make up for all that drama about not getting paid when he showed up on weight. Anything else good on the card? Because those were... this is one of the things that annoys me about, like, the performance of the night bonus. Ian Gary and Zhang Weili had the performances of the night. They put on masterclasses. But it doesn't count because the performance of the night actually means knockout or submission of the night, but you had to rebrand it because having a knockout of the night award looks bad. But then they brought in Power Slap anyway, so just change the names back. They're so weird about shit like this. You know, if there was some consistency to it, I'd understand. Mario Batista versus Damon Blackshear. This was one of those ones that really divides people, because I looked at the Reddit thread afterwards because I was like, I really want to see what people thought of this, having watched it. And, you know, there's a complete run of... the complete gamut from what a great fight, fantastic grappling between both, really competitive. I felt that Blackshear should have won, but I'm not mad about it because Batista looked great in the last round. And then people going, that was the most boring fight on the card, cut both these bums. So it really stands... It's where you stand on wrestling that will tell you what you think there. But I thought they both looked really good. I thought Blackshear, he shoots the double and goes to the back, which is really more a small man move. You see a lot of guys in the smaller divisions shoot the double on their knees and turn the corner on their knees all the way around behind the opponent. Makayev is really good at that on his knees. GCF Omega used to be good at it. Brandon Moreno, Alejandro Pantoja, who I noticed this week looks really like Sean Ross Sapp from that pro wrestling news site that I can't remember the name of. I found a photo of him and a load of strawweight women next to Adriana Moraes, which I'm just sharing with people now who are like, someone genuinely said, it came out this week, like, Demetrius Johnson, who's retired, was like, oh, I would destroy Aljo in the clinch. You know, people don't remember that he was far too small, a bantamweight. But, you know, people who've never seen DJ fight but know that he's the best, just weighing going, yeah, I batter Aljo. And dude's saying things like, Adriana Moraes is actually a featherweight. You're like, no, he isn't. In addition to this, like, one's fucking over DJ, when they aren't, his coach runs the rules and regs. Just the idea that, like, Adriana Moraes would never make flyweight. Yeah, he did, until they changed the rules and moved flyweight up 10 pounds and started hydration testing. He was 125 pounds. And then people are like, well, he's got more muscle now. You go, no, he's just cutting less weight. And then people are claiming that he's a giant. You can just find pictures of him. There's a video of him sparring with Joanna and Jacek, and she's bigger than him. And she fights 10 pounds lower. Actually, 20 pounds lower, if you consider the one hydration tested limits. But anyway, enough about that. Just stop being weird, DJ fans, is my main thing. Like, Is it not enough that he's one of the best fighters who ever lived? Do we have to be fucking weird about it? Do we have to invent stuff about his opponents, about how, like, Moraes is actually a middleweight? Marlon Vera versus Pedro Munoz, I don't really have a lot to say about, because it was Pedro Munoz flapping his arms and legs around a lot. The commentators going, oh, volume, 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 and Marlon Vera actually landing jabs. And Marlon Vera, he was doing less in terms of, like, flapping around, but he was accurate, and he was doing a lot more than he usually does. So big ups to him. I thought that was a pretty good performance from him. I'd love to see more still. It's never going to be enough to just sort of sit behind a jab and eke out the decision. But, this is the work of Jason Perillo. He makes good jabbers. The only good jabbers in MMA basically come from Jason Perillo nowadays. He changed Bisping from, like, a cardio-based pumping his hands fighter to a good jabber. He got Mackenzie Dern a good jab, and she can't do fuck all else on the feet. But when she jabs, it looks really good. It's like you're getting the silhouette of a good boxer for the jab, and then she just starts swinging like one of those cat fights on Live League. He also did he do some work with Diego Ferreira? He's done work with a few guys, and you really do see their jab just get much better almost immediately. Vera, good jab, and he was doing it off both stances too. The old Usman. Brad Tavares versus Chris Weidman was sad, but I think they did a good job here with the matchmaking, because Brad Tavares, I told you last week, but he had a near 90% takedown defense rate for a long time. He's been in the UFC like 15 years or something, and he's kept, well, I think he's at 80 or 85% now. That's insane. That would be good for someone who's had 3 fights, but to keep that up against the level of competition he's faced over 22 fights for the UFC. But he also had 2 knockout wins ever, 2 finish wins ever. So he wasn't ever going to, like, leave Chris Weidman slumped in a heap. And it was very funny listening to Daniel Cormier and Joe Rogan talking about how he's a knockout puncher. No, he isn't. He had 1 knockout in 2018 and 1 in, like, 2013 against Phil Baroni, who for some reason was back in the UFC for 1 fight only. But yeah, Weidman looking old as hell. Got his lead leg chewed up. And that's another thing, like, you can tell how knackered he is, because he knew that the guy was going to come out and kick his leg. It wasn't the leg that he broke, but he knew that the guy was going to come out and kick his leg, because, it's MMA. And he used to be able to check kicks. He broke Anderson Silva's leg with a check. He used to be able to wrestle. I mean, athleticism is a huge part of this. Like, you go watch him take down... Musasi's hilarious, because Musasi's takedown defense is arse anyway, but just watch him do snatch singles on Musasi, where he reaches out from halfway across the cage, without his knee hitting the floor, without a level change. He just reaches out ahead of himself with both hands, grabs Musasi's leg, and whips it up above his head. And, that was washed Weidman too. In his prime, he was monstrous. But, it's time to call it a day. But I am on his side if he wants to hang around, because Dana White's out here going like, oh, I'm begging Chris Weidman to stop fighting. I love you. And it's like, no, he's got a contract and he's quite well paid compared to, they want to trade out every known name for someone they can bring in on 12-12 and become a star, and then they bump him up to 50-50, and they're still like, gee, thank you, Mr. White. Chris Weidman is a former champion and, like, many-time main eventer. He's on a decent contract. They just don't want to be contractually obligated to offer him fights. Gregory Rodriguez versus Dennis Tululin. God, Tululin sucks. But I did like the single leg that Rodriguez entered on. Did a little run of the pipe. Just went to dump him down to his butt. And as soon as Tululin hopped backwards, Rodriguez stood up and went to his back. Beautiful stuff. You'll see guys do that in the flyweight division all the time. You'll see them do that in the lower divisions. It's not a bad one for bigger men, actually. Like, Glover Teixeira was doing some good stuff like that against Yuri. I think Nate Landwehr tried it against David Onama too, which was quite cool. But yeah, got back mount and then dropped an elbow on the side of his head. Because Tululin was sort of like, he went to turn from mount to his belly and he got stuck halfway, and then he just rested his head on the floor. And he was like, whoa. Rodriguez just smashed him, and the commentators just went, oh. And you realise you don't see people getting TKO'd with one elbow from the back. But it happened, and it was nasty, and I don't think anyone was arguing with the stoppage. Kurt Holliber versus Austin Hubbard was fun. I like Austin Hubbard. He's sort of like the anti-wrestling striker who also sort of loses to wrestlers. But, I did something on him a little while ago, Filthy Casual's Guide, but He has some. He's a big, strong guy who's decent at stopping a takedown, and he has some looks that make it harder to take him down. Body jabbing is a great one. Like, he looks for the body jab so that he can just poke people in the body, because it makes it very hard to duck under. You can't duck under a body jab to get in on the body, or to get in on their hips rather. And if you hit them with a body jab, it's physically just pushing them away. He does like inside low kick, and then he immediately brings his leg back and throws a knee upwards. A knee that would never work on a standing opponent, but if they dive in on him afterwards, they get knocked out. He was doing those against Marco Madsen. It was, Madsen was getting close. It was like, whoa, not good, because also Madsen gasses out hard and then starts diving after you. But Holliber actually outstruck him here at several points, and then just poured on the pressure. Hubbard was trying to wrestle, and actually did successfully for a little bit in the early going, but Holliber got on top of him in the second round, mounted him, went for the armbar, got turned off him, got the triangle. I normally at this point say a rare triangle choke, but there's been a couple in the last few weeks. Got to hold off the ninja choke from becoming the third most popular choke. The other Ultimate Fighter final was Brad Katona versus Cody Gibson. Brad Katona, I'd lost track of when this guy left the UFC, because I remembered enjoying his fight with Hunter Azure. And then I realised that he was cut off that while I was looking at his record during this fight, which is insane, because his only 2 UFC losses were that one against Hunter Azure, which was a good, fun fight. And before that, Merab, who obviously went on to become, well, next title challenger, probably. He's good. He was always good. And, like, this is the real part that sucks about the modern UFC, is that good fighters get cut. Austin Hubbard is not a great fighter. I think he's a good fighter. I think he's got some interesting looks. But he loses enough that I'm comfortable with him getting cut. Guys like Brad Katona and Timo Valiev were cut off close losses to good fighters. Even great fighters in Timo Valiev's case. So those ones kind of annoy me. But Brad Katona looked great in this one. The step-up left kick to the body, brilliant. The left hook off that. He was doing wonderful work with his left hand and his left hook. Against a much taller opponent. His right hand often drifted down, and then luckily Gibson was sort of focused on the 1-1-2. He hit him a load with him, but if Gibson had been looking for the left hook or the left high kick on the end of things, Katona could have had a lot of trouble. Some nice takedown attempts. Yeah, some just good boxing all round. They said that Katona was on the Canadian boxing team for a while, which was interesting, but yeah, I thought Gibson gave a good account of himself. It was just a really fun fight. I'd highly recommend it. Two vets just going after it. Which, honestly, I could do with a lot more of on these cards. Just old hands or experienced hands who are going to give you a good, solid fight. Nothing else super interesting from that card, but it was okay. I mean, as pay-per-views go, pretty weak. But compared to the next one, which is being headlined by Sean Strickland, not bad. So if you haven't read it, go read the Sean O'Malley cross-step piece. I think I've also got a breakdown of the Yarn fight on the Patreon. You don't need a written breakdown of this fight, but I'll do something in the week. I think I'll probably watch the Glory event, because there were a couple of fights on there that sounded interesting. And someone beat Kaito, who was on a really good run. And is a very interesting character, because he's like the only notable shoot boxing fighter still going. But yes, I'll have something interesting coming for the boys on the Patreon this week. And then, of course, we'll do the Boycast in a couple of days, and we'll be talking about this UFC event. Max Holloway versus Korean Zombie. Do not like. Co-main Anthony Smith versus Ryan Spann 2. Jesus. Luckily, there's some more interesting stuff happening further down the card. Tyler Santos is back against Aaron Blanchfield for, like, big, beefy grappler of that division. Parker Porter's on the card. Couple of decent Asians, because we are going to Singapore. And Giga Chikadze versus Alex Caceres is probably the most meaningful fight on that card. But yeah, I'll be back midweek. If you want to get in on the extra stuff, read all my articles, find out what I think about almost everything, sign up to the Patreon, support the podcast, be a boy. If you want to see what I'm writing anytime, fightprimer.com. If you want to send an email to the podcast, especially if you're scouting for a top fighter and want to send a picture of them holding the Slacky logo, more of that, please. jackslackpodcast@gmail.com. I am your boy, Jack Slack. Smith versus Spann, fight forever, bless.